Hi, I'm Daniel Lucas, and welcome to Book 101. Book 101 is all about the books that I read for the last 40 years. And today, I have my special guest. He's the author of fantasy novella, no other than Mr. Luis Magalhaes.
Hello, pleasure being here.
Welcome to Book 101, Mr. Luis. And can you please introduce yourself to our listeners?
Sure. I'm Luis Magalhaes, and I've been writing. I've been reading for a long time, and I like a very specific genre of books, right? So I love pulpy fantasy and adventure literature, especially heroic fantasy, sword and sorcery fantasy, and you know, there weren't enough books in that genre that I wanted to read recently. So I started writing my own, and I started writing in Portuguese. That's my first language. But I've spoken English since a very young age, so it's I'm kind of bilingual. And then, after having some success in Portugal, which is a very small market, being a successful writer in Portugal won't pay the bills, I decided, okay, I want to pursue a writing career. The book was well received, right? People enjoyed it. I got some fans. Let me try to play with the big boys, right, in the English market. And I started doing it, and it's very hard, but I'm building my fan base, and people seem to be enjoying the books, which is the most important thing, right? So now my job is split between writing more books and getting more people to know about them.
Definitely. Obrigado, Mr. Lewis, for your contribution
Yeah.
to the writing world. So, do you love Game of Thrones?
I do enjoy the series. Yes, that is one book that is probably the only fantasy series that I enjoy more the TV adaptation, right, than the books themselves. I read all the books, and I had fun with them, but the TV adaptation had the advantage that it ended, right. So that was cool.
Yes. So, do you think in the future you can write the same like that?
So I like one thing that I like is that when I write, I want to write in a consistent universe. That means that even if I write in separate books or separate trilogies, everything is in the same world. So the characters that are the hero of one book can eventually meet up with the heroes of a completely different book and a completely different story as secondary characters. So I want to have that quality of a world where a lot of things are happening and each character has their own agenda. But one thing that I feel is important to recover in the fantasy genre is just that feeling of multiple characters going on an adventure and just having an adventure facing an evil villain or solving an impossible situation, fighting monsters, stuff like that. Things like Games of Thrones, they tend to be very political, right? Very about wars and and conquests and kingdoms, and that's fine. I enjoy that fantasy, that sort of epic fantasy, but I feel that what's more needed today, what there's less of today, is that kind of sword and sorcery adventure, right? Where it's a party against a party facing a challenge, right? So that's what I try to direct. I'm not saying that I'm never going to write a huge, military slash, kingdom spanning epic about kings and princes and bastard children, vying for the control of a land. But that's not really what I'm into right now.
Very well said, Mr. Luis. So, let's talk about your flight of the Necromancer, a legend of Elessia. Is it dark fantasy
Yeah.
novella?
Yeah. Yeah, so that's something that I wanted to try new. So I had just finished it. It ended in December, right? My first trilogy, the Shadows of Orgarium trilogy, and uh, there were a couple of side characters that that the people who read the books told me they'd like to be a bit more fleshed out. So I thought, well, National Novel Writing Month is coming up. That was in November, right? It was a bit
Yes.
before the last book. The last book was done, and I had sent it over to the battle readers, to my greatest fans, and they gave me some real input. And they said, there are these couple of characters that we feel are really cool, and we'd like to know their backstories. And I'm like, okay, well, I try to do the National Novel Writing Month every year. So I thought, okay, this is going to be my project. In November, I'm going to write a short novella with the backstory of these three characters, which is the two warrior sisters, Helga and Hilda, and the necromancer Gottilf. They're a trio. They have a big part. They play a big secondary part in the Shadows of Orgarm trilogy. And I decided to write a novella on the National Novel Writing Month about their backstory. So what I did was I wrote 1,000 words every day, and I posted it on my Facebook page, the Legends of Elessia Facebook page, so that people would see me writing every day, right? And then, at the end of November, I gathered all those posts. I edited properly, of course. Spent 2 more months on it to making sure that it was a book of the same quality and caliber as I tried to put every book out there. And because I had originally written it for free, right, on Facebook, like in an episodical style, I decided to put it up for free on Amazon as well. I mean, I didn't charge for this as I was writing it for my Facebook fans, so I wouldn't feel right charging for it, for the general audience. So I put it out there for free, and people are enjoying it actually a lot. It's for a book that I wrote in 1 month and then polished in 2 months. It's my best rated book ever, so I'm very happy with the result.
That be awesome and congratulations. It's just like a giveaway for people love books, people.
Yeah.
And according to Mr. Peter Israel from the United States, it's a great read. Wow. How do you comment on that?
Well, I appreciate that they like it, right? I'm very happy with the reviews. I'm very happy with the positive response. Some people told me that I was a fool for making this novella available for free, that I would gladly pay for it. But I'm like, that I have plenty of paid books out there. If you want me to, if you want to give me your money, which I really appreciate, because it helps with groceries and mortgage and important stuff like that, right? You can
Yes.
buy another one of my books, or you can buy the physical print version of a book that you already love. But this one, I'm keeping it free forever, right?
Yes. This is a sample
Yeah.
that free that gives you how Mr. Luis good in writing fantasy. Mr. Peter said, I can wait for the next book. Is this a prelude for your trilogy?
Yeah, so it actually connects the trilogy, right, which is already written, with the next series of books, which is The Age of Rekindling, which I just launched the first. No, it's actually my biggest book yet, right, at over 500 pages. It's The Daughter of the Ice, and that is not going to be a trilogy. That is going to be at least a quintet, right? So there's going to be at least 5 books. I have at least 5 books planned, but it's possible that there will be 6, right? I don't like writing books that are too big, because I feel that people get tired and then don't finish them. So I think that 400, 500 pages is a great sweet spot for a fantasy adventure, right? So I'm thinking about. I'm still undecided if it's going to be 5 or 6 books, but the first one is out there, and again, it connects with that Flight of the Necromancer novella, right? So the Flight of the Necromancer novella is actually set a couple of years after the event in this book, but there's no spoilers there. So yeah, it's all interconnected. That's how I like to do it.
According to Miss Jerry Robinson from the UK, a fast paced magical history tour. So, what are the elements that you put in the story to make the story fast?
So I like to play with multiple point of views, right? And I like to write small scenes. I don't, I if characters need to go from A to B to C to Z, right? I try to illustrate only the things that are really interesting along the way. I've read a couple of fantasy books, and it's fine if people like that, right? I'm not here to judge other people's tastes and other people's writing. It's important to that there is diversity. But I've read some books where when the character are on a journey, when the characters are on a journey, they say stuff, like, so they went to a bridge and they crossed the bridge, and then they went to the city, and this was what the city was like, and etc. And it's basically people traveling. I try not to do that, right? I try to say, okay, now he saw a cave in the distance, he's heading to the cave. Then, close scene, open scene. Now he's in the cave. What is happening in the cave, right? I try to make it like that, to make it pulpy and make it snappy. Again, it's taking a cue from the old sword and sorcery novels that were very pulpy, very fast paced, like the novels of Robert E. Howard or Ed Greenwood, or David Gemmell, right?
Oh, yes. And according to Jeff Burney, the true cost of freedom and power, nicely paced and full of wheat. How did you do make the story that your readers come up with this comment?
Well, like I said, I try to do stuff that I enjoy reading, right? And I like fast paced. I like I like action, and that in particular, the cost of power and freedom, was, I read a book, right? I read a book on writing that I don't remember who wrote it. I'm sorry, right? I read a lot of books, so sometimes it's hard to keep track. But
Yes.
the author said, you should try to be, writers in general should try to be more original. Why doesn't everyone ever write about a nice necromancer or a good necromancer? And I'm like, oh, that's a good idea. Well, I guess I'll write about a good or nice necromancer. And it turned out that it's really hard, and actually, Gotif is not the nicest person, right? I'm not sure if he would be good. If good would is definitely very self-interested, but he's not evil, right? He's not completely devoid of a conscience, and so what the book ended up exploring was the kind of sacrifices, right, that people dabbling in dark magic would need to do in order to attain power, and how far they would be willing to go. And well, if you read the book, you'll find out how far Gotif and the sisters he met were willing to go.
How many chapter does?
So I usually, again, with the intent of making my books fast paced, right?
Yes.
I try to split them, right? Very, in diverse ways, right?
Okay.
So in this case, right? In this case, I usually try to split them on parts. Now, usually my books have something like 5 or 6 parts, and each part has several chapters, right? But because this was a novella, remember, I wrote it in a month, and the whole intent was for it to be a short, story about a couple of characters that had been in another one of the books, right? This one only has 3 parts, so it's 3 parts, and I want to say that it's about 10 chapters, right? If you include if you count the prologue as a chapter, it's probably 10 chapters. So again, it's a very breezy, pulpy short read.
So, which part of the book do you have a difficulty of writing with?
You know, there's this thing that I like to do, which is flavor text, which is at the beginning of each chapter or prologue or epilogue. I like to I like to do a short fictional quote from someone in the universe. So let's say that there's a character in some of my books that's a scholar, right? He travels around the he travels around the lands of Elessia, finding tombs, tomb raiding, right? He doesn't like to be called a tomb raider, but that's essentially what he is, right?
Yes.
And he writes books, right? He's a writer. He writes academic books. So every now and then, I put in the beginning of a chapter an excerpt from one of his books, or maybe an excerpt from the diary of the villain or the hero, or or a sorceress, or just a little poem from a random bard in the tavern of Elessia, right? That's what I call lore. It's not necessarily related to the story being told, but it gives you a little tidbit about the world. And I have to say that's pretty tough because
Yes,
the story flows very well, right? I'm lucky that I have a good flow when it comes to story. But then, when it comes to something like this that's a little bit disconnected with the story but connected to the world, I'm like, oh yeah, I really have to think what I'm. I got into this. I got my readers in this habit, right, of having this little tidbit before each part of the book, or before the prologue, or an epilogue. So now I can't let them down, but it's starting to become real tough to come up with those little extra contents.
definitely. So, which part of the book of Flight of the Necromancer enjoy the most?
The part that I enjoyed the most, I can't tell you about it because it's the ending, right? So that would
Yes.
be that would be a spoiler, right?
Spoiler alert.
That would be a spoiler. But
Yes.
it really flowed very nicely, right? And the ending. So the final chapter, the last chapter, there's an epilogue, of course, because I like doing epilogues, right? I like those epilogues that say, after 6 months, here's what's happened, right? I always enjoy those in the books that I read when they have them. So I try to always do one as well. So that, not all, I'm the kind of, I occasionally, not always, right? I'm not trigger happy, but occasionally I kill a character, right? So, you can look forward to that, right? Not saying I did it in this book. Maybe I did, maybe I didn't. You'll need to find out. But the last chapter in the book before the epilogue is called The Final Nightmare, right? And Godilf, Godilf is dragged into a situation outside of the realms of humans, outside of the physical reality. And I think that it will probably be surprising to the readers how he deals with that.
Okay, sounds interesting. Before we go on, Mr. Luis, I want to shout out to the people listening in Canada, my number one country listening to me, of course, in
Nice.
British Columbia. Thank you so much. Ontario, Quebec, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Nova Scotia, Manitoba, Newfoundland and Labrador, New Brunswick, Prince Edward Island, and last not but the least, Northwest Territories. Thank you for listening for this podcast, because this podcast is created to empower writers all over the world, just like Mr. Luis. So, Mr. Luis, do you think Flight of the Necromancer is good for a series or a motion picture?
Well, again, it's a novella, right? Very short. I think that you could probably do a good, short movie on it, right? Definitely. I think that it would definitely be fun. By the way, shout out to Canada. My first review for my first book came from Canada.
Yeah.
So yeah, yeah,
Yes.
right. So very happy to get in on that love for Canada. But yeah, could be a nice, meaty 1 hour, short film, Flight of the Necromancer. I can definitely see that.
Yes. So if you describe your writing, what is it?
So again, I'll go back to the classic pulpy sword and sorcery adventure, right? I write books about heroes, not super powerful heroes, right? About hero, heroes that have some training, some experience, but are more are not incredibly magical, right? That they are people that stand in the merits of their hard work and their effort and the knowledge that they gathered through hard work, and they are often facing very tough situations, almost impossible odds. Often they go on. I write about them going on adventures and facing tough situations, and that's what my writing is about. It's fast paced, it's pulpy, and it's about heroes fighting against impossible odds.
Do you think in the future you can write another genre like horror, romance, and other genre that you want to be consider?
Sure. So currently this isn't my full-time job yet, right? I have a day job, and I write in my in my free time. But the dream is to make it my full-time job one day. And I already have a very nice idea of what I will do with all that writing time. I am going to write science fiction. So I'm definitely, and it's going to be Elessia as well. So I have the plans for a Stars of Elessia series, which is, again, it's connected to the fantasy world of Legends of Elessia, but it's set 100,000 years in the future. So that's what I'm going to do eventually when I have the time to write in another genre. I enjoy science fiction, but my first love is fantasy. So as long as my time is limited, I will only write fantasy. But if I can get a bit more writing time, I am definitely getting into science fiction.
Do you think the Star of Felicia will become like Star Wars?
Well, one could hope, right, for that commercial success, but doesn't need to, right? There are plenty of there's room, I think, for stuff that isn't super blockbusters. But definitely it is, it is even if it's science fiction, it's going to be more fantastical like Star Wars. So that's not a bad match, right? It's still going to be set in a universe that's driven by forces that aren't necessarily completely transparent. It's not going to be hard science fiction for sure.
Definitely. So, are you independent publisher or traditional publisher?
No, so my first book, again, in Portuguese in Portugal many years ago, was traditionally published. But since then, I've been an independent publisher. Just you know, totally, it's completely an operation 100% run by me. Well, I guess it wouldn't, right? I guess it's not 100%, by me, because there's obviously all the fantastic people that help me, like the cover designers, my awesome editor, right? So there's definitely a team effort in producing the books, but I am 100% independent. Yes.
So, what do you think? What is the pros and cons of indie publishing?
Well, you know, I my experience, and again, I know that people have had very good experiences otherwise with traditional publishing, but my experience with traditional publishing was that they didn't help me that much at all, right? They I would get less money because they would keep a cut,
Yes.
but really the only thing that they ever did for me was deliver books by the truckload to the bookstores that that wanted them, right? The rest,
Yes.
I still, and they also did an editing job, but to be fair, right, I ended up doing my own editing and working with a second person to do the editing because I wasn't super happy with the editing provided by the publisher, right? And it's still, right, it's still my that book is still the book that I am the least proud of, just because I didn't have the complete control over it. And quite frankly, the publisher didn't love the book as much as I did, right? I think today that all my spare resources go into making, again, and go into editing, go into proofreading, go into making the books the best books they can possibly be. I feel that I didn't get that kind of love, right, from the publisher. And I was getting paid less because I was having to share the profits. So I definitely didn't have the best experience with them, and that's why it was good uh, becoming an indie. So it's definitely a bit costlier because, again, but it's all on me, right? I I have to pay my editor, I have to pay the covers, I have to spend on marketing, etc. So the costs are much higher for me as an author, right? But at the same time, the end product, I feel it's superior. It's a the books that I put out there as an indie author are just plain better. And if they're a success and if people buy them, I get a much greater share. So it's fingers crossed that it will work out in the end.
Yes, better profit. But do you think nowadays that because of indie publishing, the quality of the product that they are producing is getting less or less?
Look, it depends, right? I've read indie books, and I definitely tried mine to be like that are better than many published traditionally published books. Like I said, sometimes the traditional publisher just doesn't give a book the love it needs or the love it deserves. And if you get a serious indie author, an indie author that's willing to spend money on formatting, spend money on a good editor, spend money on making the book the best it possibly can, then you will get indie books that are better than many traditional publishing books. Now, of course, there are some, because there's no gatekeepers, as in anything, yeah, just like as many YouTube videos aren't all that great, or many Spotify podcasts aren't all that great, or this and that, right?
Yes.
Some people will try to get away with bare minimum and they will deliver low quality product, right? That's just the nature of any industry without gatekeepers. But I wouldn't say that is the reality for for the indie publishing, in general, right? There are terrible indie books out there, yes, but there are also terrible trap published books out there.
Yes, definitely. So before we go on, I'm inviting you to listen to my other podcast, Food 101, with our third season with Chef Alessandro, one of the executive chef in one of the five-star hotel in downtown Toronto. So please do check Food 101. So Mr. Luis, what is the best highlight of the flight of the Necro?
The best highlight of the flight of the Necromancer? That's a tough question, right? And I already said that I really enjoyed the final chapter. So now I need to say I need to say something different, right? I would say that when you meet real evil, right? This is something that I try. This is something that's common to many of my books and stories, right? Is that when you meet real evil, even if you win, right, it takes a piece out of you. You can't, in real life, you can't confront evil without some sort of sacrifice, right? Evil always takes a little bit of you. And I try to illustrate that in my stories as well, right? That's why the characters, right, and specifically the two female leads, Ilda and Elga, they are going to have to sacrifice something to defeat their enemy, right? And I think that what they sacrifice will be very surprising to the readers, and what that sacrifice results in will be unexpected.
Interesting, really interesting. So, Flight of the Necromancer, how do you crafted it?
How did I craft it?
Yes,
Do you mean technically what software did I use to write it, etc., etc.?
yes, in all aspect.
Yeah. Okay. So like I said, this was a national novel writing month, project. So I did 1,000 words, right? I did 1,000 words a day for the month of November, right? That ends up at something like 30,000 words, which is a pretty decent size for a novella, right? And yeah, so I actually had to travel for work during that time, so I couldn't keep a consistent writing schedule. I kind of, part of it was written in airports. So,
Yeah,
you do the best you can, right? You
yes.
do the best you can. And then, I was posting it every day. I was posting it every day on Facebook. For writing, I was using Ulysses. It's not my favorite writing tool, but, I go back and forth between Ulysses and Scrivener. I like Scrivener better, but for writing on the go, Ulysses tops it, right? Ulysses very portable, very good at synchronization, very easy to just take out your phone and write a little bit, I prefer, again, I prefer writing traditionally. Like, I'm a snob like that. I like to write on a keyboard. But when you're traveling, what you gonna do, right? You're going to do the best you can with what you have. So there I was, like, like a teenager, hammering away at my at my phone, right? Trying to get a thousand words in before I was called for my flight. So
Definitely.
yeah, so that was definitely, this book was written, across a lot of different apps and in a lot of different situations, right? And yeah,
Excellent work, Mr. Luis. So,
yeah.
who are your favorite authors?
Oh, that is finally an easy question, huh? Right.
Because,
I love Robert E. Howard. I know it's a very classic, very old author, but it really is absolutely astonishing, and his books have got, they will never leave me, right? I also love David Gemmell, of course. There's more contemporary authors that I really enjoy. Robert Salvatore, R.A. Salvatore, the guy behind The Legend of Drizzt. I
yes.
love his writing style, his action-packed writing style. Now, some and Andrei Sapkowski, right? The creator of The Witcher. Now it
Oh,
is more popular as well, right? I'm one of those hipsters that say I was reading him before he was popular, right?
oh
Before the
my
Netflix
goodness.
series. But yeah, that is a huge influence as well.
So, what are the quality of a good novel that you want to share to us?
The quality of a good novel. Well, um, good pacing, right? I would say there are. I see a lot of novels these days that, just because of the limitless nature of the medium, because now it's digital, so or print on demand, so you can write gigantic books more easily than you could before. Not that there aren't gigantic books before. Definitely, I mean, I've been reading Edmund Blake's The Fairy Queen, and that is a book from 200 years ago that is like over 1,000 pages long. But I find that these days, because it's easier to write, it's easier to publish, and Kindle Unlimited kinda gives you more money if you write longer books
Yes.
because people read more pages. I think some books have a problem with pacing. They're very slow, very plodding, right? They spend a lot of time on everything, really. So I think that a good novel has great pacing, right? I think I'm still off that school of, the best books are the books that you finish writing and then you go back and you cut 20%, right? You leave just what's essential, so that you're constantly moving. The reader is constantly moving, from action to action to action to action, character to character to character to character. Doesn't mean that it needs to be all battles all the time, right? An action sequence can just be the characters relaxing a bit after a tough fight and talking a bit about something that interests them, right? Or having an interesting meal, or singing a song to honor the fallen, something like that. Doesn't need to be always hyper action, but something should be always happening, that's going to draw the reader more into the world, or the story, right? So yeah, I think that pacing is very important.
So, what will be your advice to those aspiring writers out there to make their stories, well, not at least perfect, but at least something that they can publish?
Okay, so the basic writing advice that everyone gives is actually true, which is, try to write every day, right? And some days, you'll fail, right? I've definitely failed many, many, many days of my life, but that's a really good, principle. I think that I've been right. I'm on a good streak. I believe I've written every day for something like 5 months now without missing a day, right? And that some days that's a challenge. But when you do that, even if you throw away, right, something, much of what you write, because you feel it's not good enough, you'll get the practice in. And it really is true. It's boring, I know, but practice does make perfect. So the more you write, the better you'll write.
So, do you think that failure makes you perfect in the future?
Well, I mean, if you can learn from other people's failures, that's the best way, right? But definitely, a failure is not the end of the world, right? I've definitely, hey, the first book in my trilogy was a failure, right? The book was, I didn't know what I was doing. I really didn't know what I was doing. I launched that book, and it sold 2 copies, and it was to my mother, right? Every writer has stories like that, So definitely, you need to get some failures out of your under your belt, so you'll learn. But try not to fail too much, because it's discouraging, right? And you don't need to. Try to learn with other people's failures if you can, but don't get too sad if you fail, because everyone fails every now and again.
Definitely, people, don't afraid to commit mistake because mistake failure make you perfect in the process. So,
Hopefully.
yeah, hopefully. So, Mr. Luis, invite our listeners to buy your books.
You can find my books on Amazon, or you can go to Elessia.net or Elessia.net, right? And you can find the links to everything there. Uh, if you just search, but I guess you're going to have links in the show notes, right?
Yes, definitely,
Okay,
yes.
good, good. So I don't need to tell people where to search or what to spell or whatever. Great. That's wonderful. Look, if you enjoy action packed adventures, sword and sorcery adventures, like the classic fantasy books of old, that are more about the characters and their travels and their quests than about global fantasy events, right? You're going to enjoy my Legends of Alessia series, right? There's the first trilogy. It's the Shadows, the Shadows over Garm. You're going to enjoy that if you want, a real interesting story of good, versus evil, a classic story of heroes facing impossible odds against evil foes. If you're not ready to commit to a trilogy just yet, there is story collection called The Rose and the Night, that basically is a collection of short story prequels to books that I have already written and I'm going to write. So we can get like a nice sampling tasting for that. That book, by the way, if you go to my website, right, at alessia.net, you can get that book for free for subscribing to my mailing list. But if you don't like subscribing to mailing lists, I totally get it. I hate subscribing to mailing lists too. You can get it for just 99 cents on Amazon. And of course, The Flight of the Necromancer is free on Amazon and will always be.
Yes, people, let's support Mr. Luis because the book is one of a kind. So, do you think in the future, Mr. Luis, you can write? No, I mean, you're gonna publish anthologies.
Well, you know, I'd like to be part of some anthologies. I've not been invited yet, so maybe I don't hang out with the cool kids enough. I don't know. I'd love to be. But yeah, I'd love to be part of a fantasy anthology. I'm totally very interested in being featured along other writers, and there are some writers I love out there, right, that are doing some really nice fantasy writing, and I'm not to their level, right? I'm just a little goldfish, small, swimming away in a very large pond. But I'm trying to grow, and hopefully I'll get to write alongside some of my favorite current indie authors, right? That would be awesome.
Yes, one of the privilege, right?
Yeah.
Okay, Mr. Luis, thank you for your time.
Thank you for hosting that. This was awesome.
Maricon people, see you soon.